trials, the religious trials conducted by the Sanhedrin court, the Jews, that's the three that we talked about last week. This week we're going to talk about the three Roman trials or criminal trials that he underwent. Both Jewish law and Roman law were violated on numerous occasions in the way Jesus was arrested, tried, and executed. Now, I'm going to review a little bit from last week, so in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to turn over to Proverbs, the 6th chapter, Proverbs 6. And while I'm reviewing for you at your leisure, look through verses 16 through 19. This is where the 7 things that God hates are listed. And I want you to think about, as we talk today, how many of those things that he hates are found in the trials and execution of Jesus. So in John 11, verses 47 through 53, after Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council, meaning that they convened the Sanhedrin court. And in verse 53, we find that they planned together to kill him. Now, why did the Jewish leaders want Jesus dead? Well, if you look there in verse 47 and 48 of John chapter 11, it's because they reasoned, what are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. So, what do they mean when they say he's performing many signs? Well, miracles are signs, and they're signs that that Jesus was the Christ. So that's what they're concerned about. And in Matthew, the 27th chapter, verse 18, and Mark 15, verse 10, both of these places say that Pilate was aware that Jesus had been brought to him by the chief priests and the elders because of envy. Well, envy, some synonyms for that would be covetousness and jealousy. So why would the high priest and the elders be envious and covetous or jealous of Jesus? Well, let's think about that for a minute, and because there's 2 or 3 reasons that I can come up with. First, remember that Caiaphas and most of the Sanhedrin court were Sadducees. And the Sadducees, as we talked about last week, were not very popular among the people. But Jesus was very well liked. He had multitudes of people following him. He fed the people. He healed the people. And so he was well liked and they weren't. Number 2, Jesus had demonstrated great wisdom and knowledge of the Scripture and had made them, the Jewish leaders, look foolish on several occasions when they tried to entrap him with the questions that they asked him. And number 3, Jesus was able to perform miracles and they weren't. So 3 good reasons why they might be envious of Jesus. So the Jewish leaders were concerned about losing their place and nation, meaning that they were concerned about losing their position the position of authority, their wealth and respect and influence in the Jewish society, and they were envious of that. And so they entered into a conspiracy to commit murder. So as we talked last week, the verdict was already pre-decided, as well as the sentence was predetermined. He was going to be guilty, and they were going to kill him for it. But they had some problems, and they needed to have a crime to charge him with, and they didn't really have a crime to charge him with. And the Jews struggled to make a charge that would stick and be deserving of death. They were successful in killing Jesus despite multiple not guilty verdicts, as we're going to talk about today. So how were they successful? In other words, what method did they use to get what they wanted? Well, they used political pressure and civil unrest. They used demonstration and riot as recorded in John 19 verse 1 through 18 and Matthew 27 verse 24. We'll talk more about that as we progress today. Now, at this time, at the time of the arrest and trial, Rome ruled Judea. And Rome had set up a governor, it was their practice to set up a governor in conquered areas that were rebellious to Roman rule. And Judea was full of rebellious Jewish patriots. And these Jewish patriots, what they wanted was to overthrow Rome and set up a Jewish kingdom to rule the world. And they were looking for a leader, a king, to do that. Just kind of as an aside here, point of interest, Judas was from Judea, and some of the stuff that I read said that he may have been a Jewish patriot. So the characters that I want you to kind of be a little familiar with in today's lesson are Pilate, Herod, and the officials of the Sanhedrin court. We talked about the Sanhedrin court quite a bit last week. So Pilate was governor of Judea, and he was responsible then for keeping down the Jewish rebellion. So there's not a whole lot that's known about Pilate's early life. Some say he was from different areas. Some say Ireland, Germany area. Some say he was a Roman and became a Roman soldier. Kind of the one that I thought that was kind of the most interesting possibility was that he was actually from Spain and had become a governor of Judea because he helped the Romans conquer Spain by providing them information. In other words, he was a traitor to Spain, and his reward then was becoming governor of Judea. It's really a theory, though, and there are other. I just want to emphasize that that's not certain. Pilate committed suicide about 7 years after Jesus was executed. Now, as governor, he had a couple of tools that he could use. One, diplomacy. He could use diplomacy with the Jewish leaders to help lead that area and that country and keep the peace. The other was that he had Roman soldiers. In other words, he could use force if necessary. Herod. Herod was the son of Herod the Great. And Herod the Great had executed his oldest 3 sons because he thought they plotted to kill him. So Herod, now the one that we're interested in today that was conducted the trial of Jesus, was called Herod Antipas, or Herod the Tetrarch. Well, the Tetrarch thing comes because after his father's death, they divided Judea into 4 parts, and he was a ruler of one of those parts of Judea. Well, he's actually of Galilee, but that's after they divided it. It was Herod the Great who ordered the death of all the male children under the age of 2. And Herod that we're interested in today. He's known as Herod Antipas sometimes. And Herod was married to Herodias, who was the granddaughter of Herod the Great. Herod was a Jew, and he was appointed governor by the Romans to rule Judea and Perea, but he was just a puppet of the Roman Empire. He was allowed to rule Galilee with strict provisions that he not violate Roman law. He was not subject to Pilate. He was directly subject to the Roman government. Herod beheaded John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus, at the insistence of his wife, Herodias. And according to Luke 13, verse 31, Herod Antipas wanted to kill Jesus. The Sanhedrin court. It was made up of Sadducees and Pharisees. The court had 70 members and needed 23 members to have a quorum to hear a case. So the Pharisees were looked up to by most of the Jews, but they only controlled about 10% of the court. The Sadducees, on the other hand, controlled the other 90% of the court, so they really controlled. And they were not very popular among the Jews. And they did not believe in the resurrection of the dead, angels, or spirits, according to Acts 23, verse 8. And this is why they were so upset with Jesus when he raised Lazarus from the dead. The Sanhedrin court planned together. They entered into a conspiracy to murder Jesus, John 11:53. Now both Luke, the 22nd chapter, verses 63 through 65, and in Matthew 26, verse 65 through 68, give us a record of the end of Jesus' third trial with the Sanhedrin court. And Jesus is accused there of blasphemy based on his own testimony. There are no witnesses accusing him of blasphemy. He was accused of blasphemy, again, based on his own testimony. And Jewish law said that a person could not testify against their self. So they really had no evidence whatsoever that he committed blasphemy. Jesus was mocked and spat on. He was blindfolded and slapped and beaten with the fist. And so he was physically abused and assaulted by both the Roman soldiers and by Caiaphas and the judges of the Sanhedrin court. And the fact here that Luke and I talked about this a little bit after last week's lesson, the fact that the high priest, Caiaphas, and the other judges of the court spat on Jesus and beat him with their fist indicates that they were just in a senseless. They were so mad. They hated him so much that they totally lost control of themselves. You figure that the officials of the court are down there beating him and spitting on him. They just lost control. And I want to remind you of Isaiah 52, verse 14, which reads, "So his appearance was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men." So I think by the time that he was sent over to Pilate, he may have been virtually unrecognizable, but based on the bleeding and the bruising and the swelling and etc. from the beatings that he'd received. So that brings us down to the fourth trial of Jesus. It's the first trial by the Romans. In John 18. John 18, verse 28 says that Jesus is taken to the praetorium to see Pilate. Now, the praetorium is the governor's official residence. And we're told here that the Jewish leaders stayed outside of the praetorium because they did not want to defile themselves, meaning that they didn't want to make themselves ceremonially unclean, because if they were unclean, they would be unable to partake of the Passover feast. Now let's think about this for just a moment. They had conspired together to murder Jesus. They had bribed Judas to betray Jesus. They illegally arrested Jesus. They solicited and obtained false witnesses. They falsely accused him of blasphemy. They illegally tried him 3 times. The high priest had torn his robe, which was against Jewish law. They illegally spit in his face and beat Jesus with their fist. And they've accused him of a crime based solely on his testimony, which was against Jewish law. And now they're worried about defiling themselves. This is pure, warped, twisted hypocrisy. Jesus knew these men's heart, and this is why he called them hypocrites on so many occasions. John 18, verses 29 through 32. Verse 29, Pilate asked what Jesus is accused of. And notice then in verse 30 that the Jews do not say blasphemy, as he had been accused of in the religious trials. They simply say, if this man wasn't an evildoer, we wouldn't have brought him to you. Trust us. It's at best a very vague accusation. So why didn't they say, well, he's blasphemed? Well, the Romans, they would not have cared if he blasphemed. Blasphemy was not against Roman law, it was against Jewish law. In verse 31, then Pilate therefore says to them, well, then take him away and judge him according to your own law. So why did Pilate say this? Take him away and judge him according to your law. Well, the Jews had no specific charge against Jesus that was a violation of Roman law. Pilate probably perceived that this was a religious matter, and definitely perceived that they had brought Jesus to him out of envy. Remember Matthew 27:18 and Mark 15:10. Well, so the Jews responded, we're not allowed to put anyone to death. So here in this statement, the Jewish leaders revealed their hand. This is what they truly wanted and why they had come to Pilate. So, now they began to make accusations, trying to find something that will catch Pilate's interest, because they want Jesus dead and they cannot legally do it. Luke 23, verse 2. And they began to accuse him, saying, we found this man misleading our nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Was the Roman government concerned about paying taxes to Caesar and about possible king in Judea? Yes, absolutely. Remember, Pilate was sent down to govern Judea because it was full of rebellious Jewish patriots. Therefore, paying taxes to Rome and the possible development of a king in Judea would be of concern to Rome. Were the accusations true? Well, Mark 12, verse 13 through 17, and Matthew 22, verse 15 through 22, record for us, says, regarding the question of whether they should pay taxes, Jesus said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. So no, he had not forbidden paying taxes. And then in John 6, verse 15, the multitudes wanted to take Jesus and make him a king. But Jesus withdrew. That is to say, Jesus would not let them make him king. So both of these accusations are completely false, and his accusers knew it. Now back to John 18, verses 33 through 38. Pilate went into his house, that is the praetorium, and summoned Jesus for questioning. Pilate asked Jesus 4 questions here. In verse 33, he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered with a question, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" In verse 35, Pilate asked him, "What have you done?" And Jesus explains that his kingdom is not of this world. In verse 37, Pilate says, "So you are a king?" And Jesus answers, "That's correct." Verse 38, Pilate then says, "What is truth?" Now, that question appears to be kind of a flippant question to me. He wasn't really interested. It appears to me that well, first of all, Jesus didn't provide any answer to that. And it looks like Pilate kind of asked that question as he got up and walked off. So, John 18:38, based on his examination of Jesus, Pilate goes to the Jews and says, "I find no guilt in him." So here he is, Pilate has pronounced him not guilty. So this is the conclusion of the 4th trial of Jesus. He's pronounced not guilty by Pilate. However, this is not what the Jews wanted. They were not interested in any kind of fair trial. They're not interested in justice, and they're not interested in truth. Remember that in John 11:53, they had already decided that they were going to put him to death. They're trying to figure out how they're going to get it done. Now that brings us to the 5th trial, or the 2nd trial by the Romans. Now the Jewish leaders were not about to just let this go. So in Luke, the 23rd chapter now, verses 4 through 6, in verse 5 we find, "But they kept on insisting, saying, 'He stirs up the people, teaching all over Judea, starting from Galilee, even as far as this place.'" Well, this place would be Jerusalem. So hearing this, in verse 6, Pilate asked if Jesus is a Galilean. So was Jesus a Galilean? No. He was born in the city of Bethlehem in Judea. And then he was raised in Nazareth of Galilee. So it's the birthplace that controls. So because he was born in Bethlehem of Judea, he was Judean, he was not from Galilee. So Micah chapter 5 and verse 2 is where is the prophecy that the Christ would come from Bethlehem. So now back in Luke 23 in verse 7 here. When Pilate learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who himself was in Jerusalem at that time. Did Herod have jurisdiction to hear a case against Jesus? No. No, he didn't. Why? Well, Jesus was not a Galilean, and he wasn't in Galilee at the time. They were in Jerusalem. Why was Herod in Jerusalem? Because he was a Jew and he was there for the Passover. Verse 8. Now Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus, for he wanted to see him for a long time, because he had been hearing about him and was hoping to see some sign performed by him. What had Herod been hearing, and what sign was he hoping to see? Well, you'll remember that Herod had beheaded John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus. And Herod had heard of the miraculous signs performed by Jesus. According to Mark 6, verses 14 and following, the people were saying John the Baptist has risen from the dead, and that is why these miraculous powers are at work in him being Jesus. So Herod wanted to see if Jesus would give some sign that he was John the Baptist raised from the dead. So Herod questioned Jesus at length, and Jesus did not answer. Meaning, Jesus provided no defense whatsoever to Herod. He didn't answer him. And the chief priests and the scribes were standing there accusing him vehemently. Well, vehemently is not a word that we use very often, but it means intensely emotional, impassioned fervor, deeply felt, or bitterly antagonistic. So it was with these emotions that they were accusing him. And then in verse 11, Herod and his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him and dressed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. Herod found Jesus, in verse 14 and 15, found Jesus not guilty and sent him back to Pilate. It's interesting that Herod found Jesus not guilty here, especially considering Luke 13:31, which says that Herod wanted to kill Jesus. So this is the conclusion then of the fifth trial. Jesus has been illegally tried now by the Jewish rulers under Roman law, and he was found not guilty despite the vehement accusations made by the Jewish leaders. And even found not guilty when he didn't even provide a defense. And again, Herod here had no jurisdiction to even hear the case. He should have immediately sent him back and said, I have no jurisdiction here. So, because he didn't have jurisdiction, made the whole trial there in front of Herod illegal. So that brings us down to the sixth trial of Jesus, and the third by the Romans. Luke 23, verses 14 through 16 here. So Pilate received Jesus back from Herod, and then he addresses the Jews. And Pilate says in verse 14, "You brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion, and behold, having examined him before you, I found no guilt in this man regarding the charges which you have make against him. Nor has Herod, for he sent him back to us, and behold, nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I'll therefore punish him and release him. Excuse me? He just got through saying, we found him not guilty, not once but twice, but I'm going to punish him. This looks to me like Pilate is making an effort to satisfy the Jews when he offers to punish Jesus. Even though, like I said, he just got through saying he's not guilty. Punishment here is obviously illegal. You can't say that somebody's not guilty of anything and then go punish them. Punish them for what? If you do that very much, the masses would revolt, would they not? But Pilate's offer doesn't work. Matthew 27, verse 15 through 23 now. In verses 15 and 16, Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, offers to release either Jesus or Barabbas, a notorious prisoner. And Luke 23:19 says that Barabbas was one who had been thrown into prison for a certain insurrection made in the city and for murderer. So Barabbas was a murderer, and he was definitely rebellious to the authority. It says he was involved in an insurrection. But the chief priest and the elders, in verse 20 there, persuaded the multitudes to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. Remember now that one of the false accusations the chief priest and the elders made was he stirs up the people. Isn't it ironic that that's exactly what they're doing now? Matthew chapter 27, back to verse 22. Pilate said, "Then what shall I do with Jesus?" And they all said, "Let him be crucified." Now when Pilate asked, now in verse 23, he asked, why? What evil has he done? Well, they don't give an answer. Rather, they begin shouting, "Let him be crucified." So why didn't they give an answer? Well, they had no charge against him, for which the Romans would put him to death, which is what they wanted. So they resorted to political pressure by stirring up a riot. We ever seen this before? Yeah, in our own country. Go ahead, Luke.
I was just thinking about this when they brings him out, and they call in the crowd to decide, who do they want to release. So that almost you would think, okay, well, this should be an impartial selection of the populace that chooses, but obviously this is a crowd that the Sanhedrin has brought together into this area. So it wasn't a jury of his peers that did a cross-section. It was one side of the populace that they brought there just to stack the dead.
Yeah, they had orchestrated everything before. Why not orchestrate this riot with people, like Luke says, that were sympathetic to what they wanted to do? Because remember, Jesus was generally well liked.
Mark, they claim to be concerned about insurrection, and yet they're releasing a guy that they know is guilty of that very thing. And then they themselves, by their actions, are rebelling against Rome now.
Absolutely. Good points. Very good points. So again, they were resorting to political pressure, stirring up a riot. In verse 24, Pilate now saw that he was accomplishing nothing and that a riot was starting. So, what's the significance of the riot here? What's Pilate concerned about? Well, Pilate, you remember, he was there to keep order. He would not want the Romans to have any excuse whatsoever to say that he wasn't able to do his job. So, could Pilate have used force to put down the riot? Sure he could. Because he had, again, Roman soldiers at his disposal. These are the finest trained soldiers in the world at the time. They could put down a riot. So why didn't he? Well, can't be certain because the Bible doesn't say that exactly why he didn't just take the Roman soldiers and stop this. But maybe a little reason here might help us to see what's going on. If he uses force, the resistance then to that force could grow and spread. He already had problems in the region with rebellious Jewish patriots. And force could lead to fighting all over the area. And this could make Pilate look like he was unable to keep the peace and control of the Jews, that was what his job was. On the other hand, if he uses diplomacy and gives the people what they want, then this will likely be the end of it. Pilate will stay in control. They'll go back to their little Sanhedrin court and rule their people under Roman law, and it'll be over. So John 19, verses 1 through 5, I heard the first bell. Pilate had Jesus scourged. And in verse 2 and 3, and the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe, and they began to come to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews," and to give him blows in the face. Again, how many times has he received blows to the face now? Verse 4, Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I'm bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him." And Jesus therefore came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." So this is the third time that Pilate says he is not guilty. And he's also said that Herod had found him not guilty. So why did Jesus bring him out now in front of the people and said, "Behold the man"? Well, possibly he wanted the people to see that he had tried to beat the truth out of him. I mean, it would be obvious that he'd been beaten like that if you're standing there in front of the people. Or could even be an attempt to evoke some sympathy from the people. Jesus, at this point, was just a mess. So, those are just, again, some possibilities from my thinking of why he brought him out like that. So in John 19, verses 6 through 10, verse 6 says, when the chief priest and the officers, that would be the officers of the Sanhedrin court, saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify, crucify." And Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews insist that Jesus should die because he made himself out to be the Son of God. Well, verse 8 through 10, then Pilate was afraid and questioned Jesus again. But Jesus was not answering. So Pilate asked him if he understands that he has the authority to release him or to crucify him. And Jesus responded to Pilate's question and tells Pilate, yeah, but you wouldn't have any authority if my Father didn't give it to you. And it's because you have that authority that it was given to you by my Father that my accusers have the greater sin. So, in verse 12, Pilate made efforts to release Jesus, but the Jews would have nothing of it. So verses 12 through 16 there in John 19 record a verbal exchange between Pilate and the Jews, and the Jews suggest that Pilate would be at odds with Caesar if he released Jesus. The Jews are applying political pressure. I heard the bell, and just a few more seconds here. So the Jews are applying the political pressure. In Matthew 27, verse 26, Pilate had Jesus scourged and then delivered him to be crucified. The problem here is that under the Roman law, a person could be scourged or he could be crucified, but they couldn't do both to him. It's a violation of Roman law. So after scourging, they should have released him, but they didn't, as you know. And the reason for this is that a lot of people died from scourging. And we find here that in Matthew 27, verses 27 through 31, that Jesus was beaten again by the Roman soldiers, and then they let him out and crucified him. So I heard the second bell. Class is over. Do we have any final question or anything before we... Okay, thank you for your attention. I enjoyed getting to speak to you this last